Imari City, Saga Prefecture, Japan, late July. A quiet town of just over 50,000 inhabitants located in the far west of Japan is about to experience a terrible crime, one that will shake the entire country of 123 million people. Armed with a knife, a 24-year-old man breaks into a house with the intention of robbing it. Inside the house, a 40-year-old woman and her mother, aged around 70. Two terrified women in their own home. And no wonder, as the robbery quickly turns tragic. The daughter is killed, and the mother is seriously inflicted with knife wounds. All this to steal the equivalent of $68. At first glance, this could be a relatively common crime in many countries, but not in Japan. Traditionally, it's one of the safest countries in the world. But in this case, the criminal was called Dam Du Kang, which is not exactly a Japanese name, but that of a Vietnamese immigrant.
Japan police arrest Vietnamese citizen for alleged murder, robbery in Saga.
This was a brutal crime that has caused huge shockwaves throughout the country, and not only because of what happened, but also because of when it happened. Just 6 days after the Sanseito party achieved the biggest electoral gain of any party in the upper house elections on 20th of July. And you might say, wait, Sanseito? Josh, what on earth is that? What the hell is that party about, and what does it have to do with this gruesome robbery? Well, you see, it's a new political party that's starting to make a lot of noise in Japan, and in a single term, it has gone from having 1 seat to 15. This is a considerable leap for a party that wants to limit the number of foreigners who can live in each municipality and is committed to establishing many more obstacles. In fact, in many ways, the party seems like a direct copy of the MAGA movement, a clear example of what we might consider Japanese Trumpism. Even its leader, Sohei Komiya, a former supermarket manager, campaigned with the message, something that might sound familiar: Japan first. Since 2020, this guy has managed to gather people online in such a way that he has gradually won more and more seats in local assemblies until reaching what we just mentioned, 15 seats in the upper house, and becoming the fastest growing party in Japan. And pay attention, because it's not that they want to slow down immigration, they want to close the door almost completely.
This party even rejects unskilled foreign workers who arrive through legal channels. They argue that the integration of outsiders is impossible and see immigrants as a clear threat to Japanese identity. In their speeches, they paint immigration not as an economic necessity, but as a Trojan horse, as a way to dilute traditional culture, decrease security, and destabilize the country. They have even gone so far as to denounce an alleged global conspiracy to destroy Japan from within.
Yeah, that's right, a global conspiracy against Japan. In fact, they've even put forward theories about the role of supposed Jewish capital in this whole story. And that, despite the fact that there is hardly any Jewish presence in Japanese banking. But anyway, the point is that although many analysts believe that this is nothing more than a protest vote against Shigeru Ishiba's government for its poor economic performance, perhaps what lies behind it is more complicated. Because naturally, after crimes like the one we mentioned at the beginning of the video, many Japanese people who have not yet voted are beginning to wonder out loud. Are they right? Are we opening up the country too much? Are we putting ourselves in danger? Let's not kid ourselves. Fear doesn't come out of nowhere. The truth is that theft and burglary have increased in recent years. The homicide rate remains very low, at just 0.23 per 100,000 inhabitants, which, for example, is almost half that of neighboring countries that are also very safe, such as South Korea. Yet some data is indeed disturbing. In some prefectures, the arrest rates for certain groups of immigrants are known to clearly exceed those for Japanese nationals. So the message is getting through. Foreigners bring problems. Lots of problems, as well as increasing the lack of security. But is this true, or is it just fear disguised as statistics? Can Japan afford to close its doors to immigrants when its population is aging faster than any other country in the world? Well, in this video, we're going to dive headfirst into this social, demographic, and political time bomb that is brewing in the land of the rising sun. Because what is happening there is much bigger than an isolated crime. It's a warning to all, and the truth is, it doesn't look good. But before we continue with this story, let me ask you a question that I often ask. Did you know that almost half of those who have watched our videos in the last year are still not subscribed to the channel? Yeah, I know I've said it before, but it turns out it's still true. So if you're watching this video, you like geopolitics, and you want to understand what's happening in the world and why, don't wait any longer. Subscribe to VisualPolitik now, and you won't miss a thing. It's completely free, it'll keep you up to date, and you'll be helping us a lot to keep creating content just like this. Just click. But having said that, it's time to go to Japan.
On the edge of the katana.
Japan and immigration. These are two words that, for decades, hardly ever appeared in the same sentence, and not by chance. Tokyo has earned a reputation for being a country that is closed to foreigners. The reason? Quite simple. Many Japanese fear that if the country becomes overrun with foreigners, their culture could be diluted like ink in water. Of course, despite this, the reality is already very different. For just over a decade, Japan has been opening its doors more and more. Not too much though, and without rushing, in true Japanese style, discreetly and little by little. But they have done it. More and more people from China, the Philippines, Taiwan, and even the United States have joined the Korean community already living in Japan. As a result, today we're talking about 3.8 million immigrants. That's 3% of the population. Is that a lot? A little? Well, it depends on what you compare it to. In Germany and Portugal, immigration already accounts for more than 15% of the population. But for Japan, a country that has traditionally been reluctant to open up to the world, it's a paradigm shift. In fact, in 2024, the foreign population increased by 10.5%, setting yet another record. And this is the third consecutive year of record-breaking growth. The result? In some specific areas, immigration is leaving its mark, and a deep one at that. To give you an idea, there are now more than 350,000 Muslims living in Japan. Now let me say it again, this is very few compared to the large Western companies, but we have to put it into context. It's more than triple the number there just 20 years ago. The result? Mosques are multiplying, from 15 in 1999 to more than 100 today. And of course, Islamic schools and even Muslim cemeteries have also appeared. And not surprisingly, for many Japanese people, this represents a phenomenal shock, a change in their lifestyle, and a savage break with the cultural homogeneity to which they were accustomed. So here comes the big question. If Japan is so zealous regarding foreigners, why is it receiving more immigrants than ever? Well, the answer is as clear as it is uncomfortable. Basically because it needs them. The Japanese population is aging rapidly, and the birth rate is at rock bottom. We're talking about less than 1.2 children per woman, which is well below the minimum needed to maintain a stable population. The consequence? The population has been declining for 15 consecutive years. And to give you an idea of what we're talking about, in 2024, there were only 686,000 births compared to 1.6 million deaths. Do you see where the problem lies? With this situation, either you import workers, or the system faces serious problems. Because on top of that, an aging population needs many more hands. And that's precisely why, for decades, Japanese governments have been forced to gradually loosen the reins. As a result, Japan may still be a fortress, but it's a fortress that has had to open some doors to keep the system running. However, not everyone is happy with this. Many Japanese people are terrified by the idea that, in a few years' time, instead of 3% of the population being foreigners or of foreign descent, we'll end up with more European levels, above 10%, 15%, or 20%, simply to compensate for the birth rate problems. They also fear that in 1 or 2 generations, foreign neighborhoods will begin to appear and turn into ghettos, much like what is happening in countries such as France and Sweden. Neighborhoods where delinquency and organized crime can run rampant. Now, with data in hand, do the Japanese really have reason to be so afraid that this could happen? Let's take a look at it, and I can tell you now that there are some surprises in store. In recent years, especially with the emergence of the Sanseito party, one idea has gained traction: that immigration could bring more problems than solutions. The big fear? Crime, of course, but to what extent is this true? Well, the short answer is that, at the national level, we don't really know. Why? Because in most of Japan, there aren't even detailed statistics on crimes committed by foreigners by nationality. However, there is one exception. One prefecture that has had a lot of problems and decided to turn on the lights and look at the data head on: Saitama. So what did they find? Well, although we're talking about a single region that represents less than 10% of the Japanese population, what their statistics tell us could give us a lot of clues about what is happening, or could happen, in the rest of the country. And what exactly do these figures tell us? Well, it's best if you take a look for yourselves. In Saitama, arrests for crimes, excluding immigration offences, tell us that Turkish citizens have an arrest rate 15 times higher than that of Japanese citizens. Africans are arrested 3 times more. Westerners the same as locals, and Koreans half as much. In other words, it seems that certain groups of foreigners are much more likely to commit crimes than others. Of course, the reality in Saitama is not necessarily the same as in the rest of Japan, and obviously, we cannot forget that the aggregate data clearly tells us that the arrest rate for natives and foreigners is practically the same. Therefore, there doesn't seem to be a problem there. There are some groups with higher crime and arrest rates, but that's about it. It's not a widespread problem. But then, where does the fear come from? Well, mainly from what we were saying a moment ago. Many Japanese people believe that if more immigrants are allowed in, they will end up forming conflictive ghettos, that they won't integrate, and that this will end up being a ticking time bomb. But guess what? That's not happening right now. Quite the opposite, in fact. It turns out, immigrants in Japan tend to adapt relatively well, and many do so precisely by accepting their role as second-class citizens, with no prospects for promotion or pay raises. Basically, because those who work in Japan know that their stay there depends entirely on their visa, and that their visa depends exclusively on their job, and that their job depends exclusively on their company. So when their company decides they are no longer needed, it's goodbye Japan. Few can stay and build a long-term life in this country. Basically, those who marry a Japanese citizen and a few others. For the time being, that's how the system works. In other words, foreigners in Japan don't plan on staying for long. They arrive, adapt to what they find, and when they have to leave, they say goodbye. They also need to have a job, which logically means they already have a source of income. And that's precisely why, surprise, despite the rise of the Sanseito party, the truth is that overall, Japanese perceptions of immigration are changing, not for the worse, but for the better. In fact, in 2018, immigration raised many more questions. At that time, 46% were against the arrival of more foreign workers. However, last year, in 2024, the answer to this same question yielded completely different data. More than 60% of Japanese people are now in favor of receiving more foreign workers, and only 28% are opposed. And I know it seems contradictory to what we're telling you. How on earth can we explain that more and more Japanese people approve of immigration, while at the same time the number of members of an anti-foreigner party has increased 15-fold? Well, here comes the huge plot twist in this movie. Because what if I told you that many Japanese people are not so bothered by immigrants living in Japan as they are by other types of foreigners? Well, exactly. We're talking about tourists. I'm sure you've seen more than one tourist video about the land of the rising sun in recent years. On TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, it doesn't matter, Japan is everywhere, and it's no coincidence. Tokyo has been investing heavily in promoting the country as a destination for years, but since 2022, they've had some unexpected help. The yen has plummeted. The result, for any tourist with dollars or euros in their pocket, Japan has become a real bargain. Cheaper hotels, cheaper food, cheaper train travel. Everything is much cheaper. Add to that the rise of the Chinese middle class, and the boom was inevitable.
Japan sets new record with 36.9 million international visitors in 2024.
Last year, Japan broke its all-time tourism record with a staggering 47% increase compared to just before the COVID-19 pandemic. And check out this statistic. Right now, tourism is already the country's second largest export, behind only cars, and even ahead of electronic components. Because yes, tourism is considered an export of services, but an export nonetheless. Basically because it's an activity that brings foreign currency into the country. You sell to the rest of the world. In fact, they are taking this issue so seriously that the official target is to reach 60 million tourists a year before the end of this decade. This will allow them to pocket more than $100 billion a year from this activity for foreigners. A real boost for the national economy. An ambitious and attractive plan, because naturally it will also be a real treat for government finances. A sweetener that, unfortunately, comes with a problem. At the same time as this industry is growing at breakneck speed, it has become a source of tension. Because what is income for the government is becoming a nightmare for many Japanese people, or at least that's how they see it. And that seems to be the other factor to Sanseito's success, and the new anti-foreigner stance that is spreading across the country. For many, Japan has too many tourists. According to a survey conducted last November, 60% of Japanese people believe that tourism is getting out of control. Tourism attracts people who sometimes don't respect the country's culture or social norms. I'm sure many of you have seen videos of tourists causing trouble on the Tokyo subway or harassing locals, making bad jokes, and even some cases getting what they deserve from the police. Well, for many Japanese people, this has become a real problem. But this is not the only drawback. With an average of 650,000 visitors per week, Japanese people who are not used to this influx have, understandably, also noticed a deterioration in certain living conditions. Transport is increasingly congested, and we're talking about a country where, as many of you will know, there are oshiya, or pushers, on subway platforms to help the train close its doors at rush hour. Well, now it's much worse. But the problem doesn't stop there. Many neighborhoods are full of tourists, and it seems like there's no room for locals anymore. The bars of Golden Gai in Tokyo are already packed with tourists, and Akihabara is no longer uniquely the refuge for anime fans. The situation has reached such a point that iconic places have had to close down, literally. One example, the Lawson store, with a view of Mount Fuji. It was one of the favorite spots for tourists to take the perfect photo. The result? Overcrowding, litter, and constant disruption. In the end, the authorities said enough was enough, and banned access. But this isn't just about selfies and crowds, it's also about money. Because while tourists enjoy a low-cost Japan, it's the Japanese themselves who are footing the bill. With a weak yen and an avalanche of foreign visitors, prices have skyrocketed. Restaurants, accommodation, transportation, everything is going up, except Japanese salaries, which are increasingly insufficient because, in practice, they've been frozen for years. And of course, mass tourism is not exactly associated with much added value. So while tourists spend lavishly on low-value activities, many locals feel they can no longer afford to live in their own country. In fact, some claim that the tourism boom the country is experiencing has fueled the rise in inflation in recent months. Inflation reached 4% at the beginning of the year, a figure unprecedented in a very long time. In short, although part of Sanseito's success is based on an almost instinctive fear of opening the door too wide to foreign workers, its real momentum seems to come from elsewhere, from wariness. From a growing feeling among many Japanese that tourists have crossed the line, that they have invaded their neighborhoods, broken the rules, and driven up prices. And not surprisingly, in this breeding ground, anti-immigration and anti-tourism rhetoric is gaining traction. In a way, many Japanese people mix the two as if they were part of the same problem. A problem with a single name: foreigners. But now to the crucial question. Can Japan really afford to take a step back, close the door to tourism, put limits on immigration just when it needs it most? Well, let's find out.
Unaffordable luxuries?
As many of you probably already know, in Europe, that aging continent with a laughable birth rate, the most widespread solution has been quite clear. To keep the labour market alive, factories running, and the economy more or less afloat, the decision has been made to open the doors to immigration, skilled and unskilled, everything and everyone. Because, naturally, if there are more and more retirees and fewer young people working, someone has to foot the bill. Pensions and the higher healthcare and dependency costs that come with aging don't pay for themselves. What's needed is manpower. Well, that's exactly what could happen to Japan, only on a much larger scale. Because if Europe is aging, Japan is already in fossil mode. And we're talking about the oldest country in the world, one that has more than 90,000 people over the age of 100. Yeah, you heard correctly. More than 90,000 centenarians. And obviously, with those numbers, the question is no longer whether Japan will need immigrants. The question is, how long will it survive without them? Because this aging trend is not going to stop. On the contrary, it's going to accelerate even further. In fact, it's estimated that by 2045, which is not really far off, just 20 years from now, more than 36% of Japanese people, almost 4 out of 10, will be over 65. We're talking about 41 million people. In other words, more than a third of the country will be of retirement age. A kind of extreme Gramslandia. And naturally, this means one thing: much higher social spending. In fact, this is already happening. In 2000, the dependency ratio, that is, the ratio of workers to dependents, was 50%. Today, it exceeds 70%. Pension spending has risen from 7.9% of GDP to 10.2%, even though most pensions are capitalized. And healthcare spending has risen from 6.5% to almost 11% of GDP. Worse still, this is not the ceiling, because while the number of elderly is increasing, the number of workers is decreasing. These days, Japan has around 70 million people of working age, but by 2050, that figure could drop to a terrifying 49 million. And the question is, what then? Well, Japan has only two options. First, continue borrowing, but that would be playing with fire in a country that already has a lot of debt. Furthermore, it would be unclear how far they could go. It would be a case of feast for today and famine for tomorrow. Or second, open the door to more foreign workers. Many more. Literally millions. And yes, that would change the face of Japan, its culture, its ethnic makeup, and even its cities. But it may be the only way to avoid economic and social collapse. Because if no one works, no one pays taxes. And if no one pays taxes, who will pay what needs to be paid? At this point, it's clear. Japan cannot afford to close its doors to immigrant workers. In fact, in many cases, it is immigration that is saving traditional businesses that would otherwise have closed down. And tourism, well, more of the same. It doesn't seem very smart for Tokyo to start shooting at an industry that is beginning to become another major economic pillar. In 2024, tourism as a whole accounted for 7.5% of the national economy, directly and indirectly. And yes, there is certainly saturation in many areas, but there are also jobs and new businesses. And in a country whose economy grew by just 0.1% last year, any boost should be welcome, don't you think? So there you have it. The Sanseito party has played its cards right. Fear of losing identity, alarmism about crime, and complaints about tourist invasion. And with that combination, it has made a strong entry into the upper house. And it's not yet clear how far this Japanese version of MAGA will go in Japanese politics. Only time will tell if Japan ends up closing itself off more, or the opposite. But until then, the question is over to you. Do you think Japan should prioritize its identity, culture, and traditions over its economy and labor shortage problems? Well, leave your opinion below in the comments and let's get the debate going. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. It's free. It'll help you stay up to date with what's going on and it helps us out a lot. As always, thank you so very much for watching. Take care. See you next time.